Welcome to this brand new tutorial. In this video, we're going to learn about rulers and grids. And what you're going to find out is this will allow us to create, or at least to add, more precision to our icon creation. So all we have to do is to come over to the View button over here. And of course, we've been here before because this is how we enabled pixels so that when we zoomed in at 800%, we were able to see whether our icons were pixel perfect or not. But what we're interested in now is this option here, which is not enabled currently. So I'm just going to enable it now. Now, as soon as I do this, I have these rulers that exist on the sides. And just like a real ruler, all these things do is they enable us to measure what we're trying to create to give it some accuracy. So one thing you should know is if I want to move, I can't currently move this ruler at the moment because it's locked. If I unlock this, I'm able to actually just move the ruler like this, but once it's locked, I can't actually do that. One other thing is when I get into the ruler section, you'll notice these red lines. And these are some guides that I can add. So for example, let's say I want to add a guide at the point 200 in my ruler like this. I can add another guide here at point 400. Now, what's really interesting about these guides is that this gives us an area through which we might want our design, whether it be an icon, wireframe, or a mockup, to exist. And these guides as well, if we were to create a new layer, the layer will snap quite easily to these guides. For example, let's just create a random shape here. Let's say a rectangle. I'm just going to add it here. And so I'm just going to take this rectangle and just look how easily it snaps to the guides like that, which is pretty interesting if you think about it. So I could add guides as well to the sides here. So I can add a guide here and I can add a guide there. And that just defines an area maybe where I want something to be defined. It really depends on what you're trying to build. And as with any other tool, this is something that's supposed to add convenience. So it's something that you could add to your workflow if you would like to, or if you prefer not to use them, then it's absolutely fine. Because really what this is all about is to help you, as far as possible, come up with your icons or designs as easily as possible. So this certainly is an optional thing to add. So how do we get rid of these red lines? Well, we're going to just select it and hold on the mouse button and then come to the top somewhere until we see something that looks like an X button like that, and then off it goes. And it's got that sound there as well. So let's do that again. We'll just remove all these lines because we don't need them at the moment. Okay, so let's come back to the view here. We know about rulers. Now let's just check out what grid does. So we'll just say show grid. So this looks a lot like one of those graph books that you get when you're learning about geometry back in high school, or if you're still in high school, then you are probably very familiar with this. This is a lot like those graph books whereby you have to draw all sorts of things like your quadratic equations. Of course, depending on what kind of algebra and calculus you might have done, you might be familiar with what I'm talking about. But the idea here, just like your graph books, is the same in that these grids will enable us to have a certain level of precision with what we design. So right now, each of the boxes in my grid is 20 pixels. How do I know this? Well, I can just come back to view. I go to grid settings. And right now it tells me that each block size is about 20 pixels. And it's every 10 blocks that I get a thick line, and the thick line being these ones over here. So 10 blocks, and each block is 20 pixels. So you might not want to have 20 pixels, so you could easily change this with the grid settings, and you could change it to, say, 10 pixels. If I just change this to 10 pixels instead, then the boxes become a lot smaller than they were before. Let me just change that back to the default of 20 pixels. You could also change the colors of the grid lines. If you don't like red, you can do that as well. And this is just an extra added level of precision that we can add to our designs. So in the event that you want your designs to have an exact size, this is what you would use. Because of course it's hard to determine. For example, right now we were using these coordinates, and I think you've noticed something here, that this house icon isn't in fact pixel perfect, but we'll deal with that. In fact, let's deal with that right now. So we'll just change that to 180 and we'll just shave off that. That makes it pixel perfect. So again, looking at this, you might use just the dimensions given here, but to give it an extra level of precision, you might have developed it within a block like this with some guides around, which would give it a lot more precision than the way we've been doing things so far, which really is a great thing to do if you really want to get your icons perfect. So there's another option here on layout, and I'm not going to go over this because layout is more important if you are designing for the web. And the reason for this is that it simply arranges everything in columns and rows, which is more important for things like responsive web development, because typically in responsive web development, you have things developed within particular rows and columns, because then if you move to, say, a mobile layout, then that 3 columns, for example, becomes 1 column, and you want to interchange between them. So your designs will be designed in terms of columns and rows, which isn't important with mobile design, because typically with our screens, we really only have 1 column at a time. Unless maybe perhaps you are developing for the iPad, then the layout would become really important. But we're not really designing for the iPad within this course, so we're not going to be checking out layout. But it would be very interesting if you'd like to do that on your own, if, say, you're going to go into web development, or you'd like to develop complex designs for, say, the iPad here within Sketch. So I want to remove all this. We will have some practice with this later on, but for now, this is just a brief introduction into what those things are. It's a very valuable and powerful toolkit to have in your design. So with that, we're going to conclude this video.